Section 109 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Read for LibriVox.org by Alan Mapstone. Statue of Quauhtemoc. Photograph page 516. This statue was raised in memory of Quauhtemoc, last prince of the Aztecs, and the warriors who fought with him in 1521 in defense of their country. By order of Cortes, the prince was fiendishly tortured to make him reveal the hiding place of Montezuma's treasure. But the hero bore the infernal pain of the fire with admirable fortitude. When TAPPAN testified his own anguish by groans, and begged his prince to reveal the location of the gold, Quauhtemoc rebuked him, saying coldly, "I am taking my pleasure in my bath." This dictum is proverbial in Mexico, and is employed when one has one's own troubles, yet is asked to bear those of others. Cortes either believed or pretended to believe that his prisoner was plotting against him, and ordered his execution. When brought to the fatal tree, Quauhtemoc displayed the intrepid spirit worthy of his better days. "I knew what it was," he said, "to trust to your false promises, Malinche. I knew that you had destined me for this fate, since I did not fall by my own hand when you entered my city of Tenochtitlan. Why do you slay me so unjustly? God will demand it of you." TAPPAN, protesting his innocence, declared that he desired no better lot than to die by the side of his lord. The unfortunate princes, with one or more inferior nobles, were then executed by being hanged from the huge branches of a ceiba tree which overshadowed the road. August 21 of each year, the anniversary of the torture of the prince, a curious festival is held at the base of the monument. Aztec costumes are worn by the participants, Indian dances are performed, and the descendants of the great prince recall, in the Aztec language, the chief episodes of his life. End of section 109. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 110 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Read for LibriVox.org by Jared Starr. Mexico Part 3. Modern Mexico. Historical note. From the time of Cortes until her final revolt against Spain in 1810, Mexico was under Spanish misrule and suffered from unbearable taxation, corruption of the courts of justice, and the granting of offices and privileges to those only who had been born in Spain. The land which now forms the state of Texas formerly belonged to Mexico. Texas fought herself free and became a part of the United States. Disagreements about the boundary arose, which led to war between Mexico and this country in 1846–48. In 1860, Mexico refused to make payments on money borrowed from foreign nations. This resulted in war with France, wherein the French were victors. Napoleon III hoped to found a French empire in America, and gave the crown of Mexico to Maximilian, brother of the Emperor of Austria. On the withdrawal of the French troops, Maximilian fell into the hands of ex-President Juarez and was executed. Juarez was then made president and held this position until his death in 1872. In 1877, Porfirio Diaz became president. Under his rule, the country made an amazing advance in material prosperity. Nevertheless, heavy taxation, the extortions of officials, and the impossibility of expressing the free will of the people at the polls became at length unendurable, and in 1910 there was an outbreak. Diaz was forced to resign and withdrew to Spain. Francisco Madero was elected in his place, but was unable to carry out the promised reforms, and uprisings soon broke out in various parts of the kingdom, which were suppressed with difficulty. In October 1912, General Felix Diaz, a nephew of the old dictator, attempted to seize Veracruz. He was captured, but instead of being executed in the accepted Mexican fashion, was imprisoned at the capital. In February 1913, a body of troops in the capital revolted, released Diaz, and attacked the National Palace. After 9 days of sanguinary but indecisive fighting in the heart of the city, 2 of Madero's generals, Huerta and Blanquet, deserted with their troops to the rebels. Madero was arrested and soon after assassinated, and Huerta was proclaimed provisional president. End of section 110. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 111 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The World Story, Volume 11, Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies, edited by Eva March, TAPPAN. Section 111. The Angels of Buena Vista, 1847, by John G. Whittier. In the war between the United States and Mexico, there took place at Buena Vista what has been called the most brilliant battle of the war. The kindly Mexican women hastened to the field to aid the wounded and dying, whether Mexicans or Americans, and it is upon this fact that Whittier founded the following poem. The Editor. Speak and tell us, our Ximena, looking northward far away, o'er the camp of the invaders, or the Mexican array, who is losing, who is winning? Are they far or come they near? Look abroad and tell us, sister, whither rolls the storm we hear? Down the hills of Angostura still the storm of battle rolls. Blood is flowing, men are dying. God have mercy on their souls. Who is losing, who is winning? Over hill and over plain, I see but smoke of cannon clouding through the mountain rain. Holy Mother, keep our brothers. Look, Ximena, look once more. Still I see the fearful whirlwind rolling darkly as before, bearing on in strange confusion, friend and foeman, foot and horse, like some wild and troubled torrent sweeping down its mountain course. Look forth once more, Ximena. Ah, the smoke has rolled away, and I see the northern rifles gleaming down the ranks of gray. Hark, that sudden blast of bugles, there the troop of Menin wheels, there the northern horses thunder with the cannon at their heels. Jesu pity, how it thickens, now retreat and now advance, right against the blazing cannon shivers Puebla's charging lance. Down they go, the brave young riders, horse and foot together fall, like a plowshare in the fallow, through them plows the northern ball. Nearer came the storm, and nearer rolling fast and frightful on. Speak, Ximena, speak, and tell us who is lost and who is won. Alas, alas, I know not, friend and foe together fall, o'er the dying rush the living, pray my sisters for them all. Lo, the wind, the smoke is lifting, blessed Mother, save my brain. I can see the wounded crawling slowly out from heaps of slain. Now they stagger, blind and bleeding, now they fall and strive to rise. Hasten, sisters, haste, and save them, lest they die before our eyes. O my heart's love, O my dear one, lay thy poor head on my knee. Dost thou know the lips that kiss thee? Canst thou hear me? Canst thou see? O my husband, brave and gentle, O my Bernal, look once more on the blessed cross before thee. Mercy, mercy, all is o'er. Dry thy tears, my poor Ximena, lay thy dear one down to rest. Let his hands be meekly folded, lay the cross upon his breast. Let his dirge be sung hereafter, and his funeral masses said. Today, thou poor bereaved one, the living ask thy aid. Close beside her, faintly moaning, fair and young, a soldier lay, torn with shot and pierced with lances, bleeding slow his life away. But as tenderly before him the lorn Ximena knelt, she saw the northern eagle shining on his pistol belt. With a stifled cry of horror, straight she turned away her head. With a sad and bitter feeling looked she back upon her dead. But she heard the youth's slow moaning and his struggling breath of pain, and she raised the cooling water to his parching lips again. Whispered low, the dying soldier pressed her hand and faintly smiled. Was that pitying face his mother's? Did she watch beside her child? All his stranger words with meaning her woman's heart supplied. With her kiss upon his forehead, "Mother," murmured he, and died. A bitter curse upon them, poor boy, who led thee forth from some gentle, sad-eyed mother, weeping lonely in the north. Spake the mournful Mexic woman as she laid him with her dead, and turned to soothe the living and bind the wounds which bled. Look forth once more, Ximena, like a cloud before the wind rolls the battle down the mountain, leaving blood and death behind. Ah, they plead in vain for mercy, in the dust the wounded strive. Hide your faces, holy angels, O thou Christ of God, forgive. Sink, O night, among thy mountains, let the cool grey shadows fall. Dying brothers, fighting demons, drop thy curtain over all. Through the thickening winter twilight, wide apart the battle rolled. In its sheath the sabre rested, and the cannon's lips grew cold. But the noble Mexic women still their holy task pursued. Through that long dark night of sorrow, worn and faint and lacking food, over weak and suffering brothers with a tender care they hung, and the dying foeman blessed them in a strange and northern tongue. Not wholly lost, O Father, is this evil world of ours. Upward through its blood and ashes spring afresh the Eden flowers. From its smoking hell of battle, love and pity send their prayer, and still thy white-winged angels hover dimly in our air. End of section 111. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 112 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Read for LibriVox.org by Alan Mapstone. Maximilian at Queretaro, 1872, by Margaret Junkin Preston. The scion of immemorial lines, august with history's hoary, whose grand imperial airship shines with the starriest names of story, stands doomed to die, and the grenadiers, in serried and silent column, their pitiless eyes half hazed with tears, are waiting the signal solemn. The brave young emperor lifts his brow, it never has shone so regal, yet it is not the pride of the Habsburg now, nor the glance of the clefted eagle. No blazing coronet binds his head, no ermined purple is round him, but his manhood's majesty instead with royaler rank has crowned him. An instant's pause, he is caught away to Schönbrun's peaceful bowers. There's a lightning dazzle of boyhood's day, Vienna's glittering towers flash back with a mocking blinding glare to barter such princely splendor for wrecked ambition and stark despair, betrayal and base surrender. Wild infinite taunting memories thrill his soul to its molten center. Remorses that madden him clamor still, but he will not let them enter. The grovelling traffic of time all done, he would have the temple lonely, its sanctuaries emptied one by one, that God may fill it only. But under the Austrian skies afar, aglow with a light Elysian, the mullioned windows of Miramar loom out on his tortured vision. He looks on its grey Abels again, he is threading its peached alleys, he is guiding his darlings' slackened rein as they scour the dimpled valleys. He can gaze his last on the earth and sky, step forth to his doom, nor shiver. Eternity front his steadfast eye, and never a muscle quiver. But love's heart-rackings, despair and tears wrench the fixed lips asunder. My poor Carlotta, now, grenadiers, your volley may belch its thunder. End of section 112. This recording is in the public domain. Section 113 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Read for LibriVox.org by Alan Mapstone. The Last Moments of Maximilian by Jean-Paul Lorrain, France, 1838. Painting, page 524. Early in the morning of the day set for the execution, a priest came to the emperor to give him the last sacraments, and mass was celebrated. At 6, the officer came for him. The emperor said, "I am ready." His servants wept and kissed his hands. "Be calm," he said. "You see I am so. It is the will of God that I should die, and we cannot act against that." The emperor and the 2 generals who were to die with him were then carried through the crowded streets to the place of execution. On taking their positions, the emperor moved aside for General Miramon to stand in the middle, saying, "A brave soldier must be honored by his monarch even in his last hour, therefore permit me to give you the place of honor." The fatal shots were fired, and the Emperor Maximilian was no more. End of section 113. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 114 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Fernando Borrego. The World Story, Volume 11, Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Edited by Eva March TAPPAN, Section 114. The Rule of Porfirio Diaz, 1877-1919. By Channing Arnold and Frederick J. Tabor Frost. Until 1876, when upon his distracted country, Porfirio Diaz, innkeeper's son and born ruler descended of Deus ex machina, the state of Mexico may be summed up in the words rapine, murder, and sudden death. But though Mexico has had, and the bulk of her population has had reason during the past 30 years to thank her lucky stars for him, an iron master, the quietude of the country is only skin deep. Law and order is represented by a blend of a rough and ready justice, a sort of legalized lynch law, with an official law administration venal to a high degree, with every second mestizo, footnote, a man of Spanish and Indian blood, end footnote, a born robber. Mexico is no place for tedious processes with remands and committals to assizes. A man caught red-handed is usually dealt with on the spot. Such a case occurred while we were visiting the capital. 2 days after we had traveled on the marvelous mountain railway, the guards of the day train, which, by the way, always takes the bullion to the coast and has a carriage load of soldiers attached as military convoy, saw, as they approached the deepest descent, 2 fellows loitering on the line, presumably wreckers. The train was stopped, and the guards and the officer commanding the convoy gave chase, and coming up with the men, shot them with their revolver, and kicked the bodies down the precipice. The sun and the vultures do the rest, and on the re-arrival of the train in the capital, the matter may or may not be formally notified to the government. Even to the casual observer, the difficulty of governing Mexico must seem inexpressibly great. President Diaz has succeeded not so much because he does not know what mercy means, or because a rifle bullet is his only answer for those who question his authority, but because he is endowed with superhuman tact. The iron heel, like that of Achilles, has its vulnerable spot if pressed too hard upon a people's throat. And so he has little dodges by which he appears to his subjects to exercise a judicious clemency. If some redoubtable criminal is captured, some monarch of murderers, Diaz knows well that among his thousands of crime-loving fellow countrymen, the brute will have a large following. His execution will mean the declaration of a vendetta against the police. So he is put on his trial, condemned to death, and within 24 hours the president commutes his sentence to one of 20 years incarceration in the penitentiary. After about a week there, he is taken out one evening, as usual, into the prison yard for exercise, under a small guard of soldiers. One of these sidles up to him and suggests that as the night is dark, he might make a bolt for it. The convict believes it a genuine offer, sprints off, and is dropped at 30 yards like a rabbit by the 5 or 6 soldiers who have been waiting under the shadow of the farther wall. The next morning, the official newspaper states, quote, "Last night the notorious criminal so-and-so, to whom His Excellency the President recently extended clemency, made an attempt to escape while being exercised in the prison yard, and was shot dead by the sentries." End quote. Thus everybody is pleased, except possibly the convict. And the President, without the least odium to himself, has rid the country of another blackguard. Another stroke of real genius was the way in which he has succeeded in setting thieves to catch thieves. When he became president, the country was infested with bandits who stopped at nothing. But Diaz erected huge gallows at the crossways all over Mexico, and the robbers found that they had to stop at these, and stop quite a long while, till the sopilotes and vultures had picked their bones to the blameless white to which good Porfirio Diaz desired the lives of all his subjects to attain. After some weeks of brisk hanging business, Diaz played his trump card. He proclaimed that all other bandits, known or unknown, who cared to surrender, would be enrolled as rurales, country police, who, garbed in state uniform and armed with Winchesters, would spend the remainder of their lives agreeably engaged in killing their recalcitrant comrades. This temptation to spend their declining days in bloodshed, to which no penalties were attached, was too much for many. Thus 50% of Mexico's robbers turned police and murdered the other 50%, and acute Diaz has a body of men who, and whose sons, have proved, and sons' sons will prove, the eternal wisdom of this hybrid sphinx of a ruler. But there is a comic side to Mexican justice. There is a Gilbertian humor in the go-as-you-please style in which prisoners are treated. In one crowded court, when the jury had retired to consider their verdict, the prisoner was engaged in walking up and down, hands in pockets, cigarette in mouth, while the police, entirely oblivious to their charge, smoked and chatted in another part of the court. We asked one officer whether they were not afraid of the prisoner attempting an escape. "Oh no," he said. "He'll wait for the verdict." Road making is practically always done by gangs of convicts, and when they think they have had enough work, they throw down their spades and picks, and warders and everybody sit down on the roadside and enjoy a cigarette and a chat. The British minister told us that he had recently been shown over the penitentiary, in which at the moment there was a bloodthirsty rascal whose record of crime would have shamed Jack the Ripper. The governor of the jail entered into a long and friendly conversation with him as to his wife and family, and, as the British minister humorously put it, we were all but presented to him. Nominally, Mexico is a republic. Really, she is nothing of the sort. There is a Senate, a Chamber of Deputies, periodic elections of state representatives, a governor and council in each state of the Federation. But for upwards of a quarter of a century, these have all been but pawns on a chessboard. The player of a man of such astounding nature that those who laughed at Mrs. Alec Tweedy's description of him, the greatest man of the 19th century, laughed. From the fullness of their ignorance, Porfirio Diaz is an autocrat. He is an autocrat, fiercer, more relentless, more absolute than the Tsar of Russia, than any recent Tsar has been, almost than Peter the Great himself. He is more. He is a born ruler. He has played for the regeneration of his country. He has played, but it is too much to say he has won. Nobody could win. But he has changed the bloody dogs of anarchy and murder, chained them successfully for so many years, that there are some who forget that he has not killed them outright, Diaz is literally living over a volcano. He is a personified extinguisher of the fierce furnace of his country's turbulence. But when death removes him, what then? The deluge, surely, and after that one, more apotheoses of the Monroe Doctrine, and the very wholesome, if somewhat aggressive, Stars and Stripes. You must go to Mexico and live among its people to know all this. It is singular how little the English people know of the country. Only the other day a veteran Anglo-Indian officer gravely asked us, "What is the exact position of Mexico in the United States of America?" We simply gasped. Words failed in such an emergency. Before Diaz came, Mexico's history was one of uninterrupted rapine, murder, and sudden death. Out of a morass of blood, he has made a garden. Out of robbers, he has made citizens. Out of bankruptcy, he has made a revenue. Out of the bitterest civil strivings, he has almost made a nation. He is nearly 80. He is upright as a dart. He has the face of a sphinx with a jaw which makes you shudder. He rarely talks. He still more rarely smiles. And yet, the whole man expresses no false pride, no wind in the head. His icy, superhumanly self-controlled nature is too great to be moved by such petty things as pride and a vulgar joy in power. In manner and in strife, he is simplicity itself. He rides unattended in the paseo. He comes down to the jockey club in the afternoon, and the members just rise and bow, and the president picks up his paper and sits quietly at the window reading. He dislikes all ostentation. His food is simple. His clothes are almost always a plain blue serge suit and dark tie. And in his winter home, in the city, he lives as a simple citizen. But his power is literally limitless. The Mexicans do not love him. Nobody could love such a man. The lower classes fear him unreasonably. The upper classes fear him too. But it is blended with a lively sense of what he means to Mexico. But mark you, there is nothing of the bully about him. The bully is always weak, a coward. If Diaz was arrogant, he would be assassinated in 24 hours. He knows that. He knows the blood of the cattle he drives. Nobody but a madman whips a blooded horse. But he must have an iron wrist and a good hold on the rein. And that is why one can safely describe Diaz as a born ruler. He instinctively understands his subjects. He has not learned it, for he began 30 years ago. He was never educated in statecraft, for, indeed, he had no education at all. He was merely the son of an innkeeper, first sent to a Jesuit seminary, whence he ran away and joined the army. No, the man's secret is an iron will and positively miraculous tact. Whatever he does, whatever he orders, is always done so nicely. Everybody knows it has got to be done. Nobody ever crosses Diaz and lives to boast of so doing. But he gilds the pills and thinks his people must swallow, and they gulp them down and look up with meek smiles into that awful face. Here's a little characteristic story of him. Some while back, there was an election of governor of Yucatan. The Yucatan people have always been one of the most restive of the presidential team. They nominated a man disagreeable to Diaz. He nominated a second. The election ballot took place. The Yucatan nominee was successful by an enormous majority. The news is wired to Mexico City. Back comes the presidential answer. Glad to know my man elected. Am sending troops to formally inaugurate him. The troops came and Diaz's man was formally installed. To the Chamber of Deputies, no one can be elected against the president's wish. For the overpopular governor of a state, Diaz provides distinguished employment elsewhere. Such a case occurred while we were in Yucatan. Señor Olegario Molina, of whom we shall later speak more, has been for some years deservedly popular in Mérida. for he has done much to improve it. President Diaz visited Mérida recently, and on his return appointed Señor Molina a cabinet minister. When he arrived in Veracruz, Molina found the presidential train awaiting him, and on reaching Mexico City, the president and the whole cabinet had come to the station to greet him, and drove him triumphantly to the Iturbide Hotel. Charming courtesies. How favorably the presidential eyes beam on him. Yes, but he is banished. As much banished as the shivering pauper Jew workmen turned away from the London docks. He was too powerful. He is safer in Mexico City, far away from the madding crowds who would perchance have made him state dictator. A too popular cabinet minister, again, is sent as minister to Madrid. Another is found essential to the pacification of the turbulent state of northern Mexico. And so the pretty game goes on, and there is literally no kicking amongst the presidential team. But there are fiercer exhibitions of autocracy, at which people only hint or of which they speak in whispers. There is no Siberia in Mexico, but there are the equivalents of banishment and disappearance for those who would challenge the authority of the Mexican czar. Even criticism is tyrannically repressed. There is a press, but the muzzling order has long been in force, and the recalcitrant editors soon see inside of the penitentiary. General Diaz's present second wife is the daughter of a prominent supporter of Lerdo de Tejada, who on the death of Juarez assumed the presidency, but was expelled in 1876 by Diaz. The alliance brought about an armed peace between the two men. But they tell this story. One day an argument arose, and hot words followed. It was at a meal, and when wine's in, wit's out. Diaz's father-in-law went far, and half in jest, half in earnest, said, "Why, Porfirio, you almost tempt me to turn rebel again." They all saw the president's face darken, but the storm blew over. That night, it is said that Madame Diaz had to go on her knees to her husband to beg for her father's life. Such is the arbiter and autocrat of Mexico. What then is the state of the country politically, and what will be her future? Mexico's great weakness, she has many, but this overtops all others and lowers menacing on her political horizon, is that she is not a nation. There is no true national feeling, and a moment's thought will show that the circumstances of her population forbid the existence of such. On the one side you have the Spanish Mexicans, the white population, representing the purest European blood in the country. They are but some 19% of the population of 12 million odd. Among them, and among them alone, is patriotism, in its highest sense, to be expected or found. On the other side you have the vast mestizo class, half castes, some 43%, and then the purer Indians, forming the remaining 38%. Of these three classes, the characteristics are sufficiently marked to destroy hope of any welding or holding together. The Spanish Mexicans are sensual and apathetic, avaricious and yet indolent, inheriting a full share of that Castilian pride and bigotry which has worked the colonial ruin of Spain. Brave, with many of those time-honored traits of the proverbial Spanish dawn, they are yet a people inexorably marked down by fate in the international remnant basket. They have had their day. Ye gods, they have used it too. But it's gone. The mestizos, near half the population, have all the worst features of their Spanish and Indian parents. Turbulent, born criminals, treacherous, idle, dissolute, and cruel. They have the Spanish lust and the Indian natural cynicism, the Spanish luxury of temperament with the Indian improvidence. These are the true Mexicans. These are the unruled and unrulable hodgepodge, whom Diaz's iron hand holds straining in the leash, the dogs of the rapine, murder, and sudden death, whose cowardice is only matched by their vicious treachery. And last, there are the Indians, heartless, hopeless, disinherited, enslaved, awaiting with sullen patience their deliverance from the hated yoke of their Spanish masters, not a whit less abhorrent to them because they have had 4 centuries in which to become accustomed to it. The heterogeneity of Mexico's population is only matched by the depth of the antagonism to each class, to each and all their most vital interests. To a common enemy, Mexico can never present an undivided front. Indeed, it is not too much to say she can never have a common enemy, and whensoever the bolt comes, it will find Mexico unprepared. A land of ethnic shreds and patches, slattered in her policy, slattern in her defense, her vitals preyed upon by the vultures of civil strife. Of all lands she might best afford a realistic presentment of the sad tale of the Kilkenny cats. End of section 114. This recording is in the public domain. Section 115 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Read for LibriVox.org by Fernando Borrego. The National Palace, City of Mexico. Photograph, page 534. No one at all familiar with the history of Mexico can wander about the streets and suburbs of this, its principal city, without seeing at every turn some evidence of the vast changes which have marked its past, and which have made its story so thrilling. If you push aside the broad-leaved plants at the Grand Plaza, you find heaped up and all covered with tangled vines, broken fragments of rudely carved stones, once the glory of an Aztec temple. If you climb down the steep hill under Chapultepec and break away the matted underbrush, you will discover the mutilated effigy of Montezuma's predecessors, stretched out on the natural rock. The same the ancient sculptor selected for his chisel in the days when the groves about him echoed with song, and when these same gnarled cypresses gave grateful shadow to priest, emperor, and slave. The two civilizations, pagan and Christian, are still distinct to those who look below the surface. Time has not altered them materially. Even today, in the hollows of the mountain and amid the dense groves of the tropical slopes, the natives steal away and prostrate themselves before the stone images of their gods, and in churches of the more remote provinces, the parish priest has found more than once a rude sculptured idol concealed behind the Christian altar. F. Hopkinson Smith. The palace shown in this picture occupies an entire block in the heart of the city of Mexico, on a site once covered by a palace of Montezuma. In a decree signed by the Emperor Charles V, the property was granted to Cortés, the conqueror of Mexico, who built himself a dwelling on the site. Since that time, additions and alterations have been made until but little of the original building is left. President Madero made his headquarters in this palace during the uprising of 1912, and from the windows, his machine guns mowed down hundreds of rebels in the square below. Here he was confined after his capture by Huerta, and it was while being removed from this palace that he was assassinated. End of section 115. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 116 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Read for LibriVox.org by Jared Starr. The West Indies. Historical note. West Indies is a general name for the Bahamas and the Greater and Lesser Antilles. Their history is much the same, namely, discovery and colonization by the Spaniards, introduction of Negro slaves, who became a large and sometimes powerful portion of the community, and the falling into the hands of some other nation. In the 17th century, the Bahamas became a refuge for pirates, and during the Revolutionary War, for the friends of King George. In the American Civil War, Nassau was headquarters for blockade runners. The Greater Antilles comprise Cuba, Haiti, Jamaica, and Porto Rico. In Cuba colonies were founded, but in their constant fear of pirates and attacks by other nations, the Spanish colonists had little comfort. The misrule of the Spanish aroused a serious revolt in 1895. Much sympathy for the Cubans was felt in the United States, and the mysterious destruction of the battleship Maine in the harbor of Havana in 1898 resulted in war. Spain was forced to give up all claim to Cuba, which became independent. Haiti was a colony of France, but after the insurrection, led by Toussaint Louverture, its independence was recognized. Jamaica belongs to England, and for many years was a crown colony, but at length received some degree of representation. Porto Rico was in 1869 made a province of Spain, and, in the Spanish-American War of 1898, it was surrendered to the United States. Of the Lesser Antilles, Martinique is known, first, as the birthplace of the Empress Josephine, and second because of the terrible eruption of Mount Pelee in 1902, which destroyed Saint-Pierre, the largest town on the island. End of section 116. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 117 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Piotr. The World's Story, Volume 11, Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Edited by Eva March TAPPAN. Section 117. The First Landing of Columbus, 1492. By Ferdinand Columbus, son of Christopher Columbus. On Monday the 8th of October, 12 singing birds of various colours came to the ship, and after flying round it for a short time, held on their way. Many other birds were seen from the ship flying towards the southwest, and that same night great numbers of large fowl were seen, and flocks of small birds proceeding from the northwards, and all going to the southwest. In the morning a jay was seen, with an alcatraz, several ducks, and many small birds, all flying the same way with the others, and the air was perceived to be fresh and odoriferous, as it is at Seville in the month of April. But the people were now so eager to see land, and had been so often disappointed, that they ceased to give faith to these continual indications, insomuch that on Wednesday, the 10th, although abundance of birds were continually passing both by day and night, they never ceased to complain. The Admiral upbraided their want of resolution, and declared that they must persist in their endeavours to discover the Indies, for which he and they had been sent out by their Catholic Majesties. It would have been impossible for the Admiral to have much longer withstood the numbers which now opposed him, but it pleased God that in the afternoon of Thursday, the 11th of October, such manifest tokens of being near the land appeared, that the men took courage and rejoiced at their good fortune as much as they had been before distressed. From the Admiral's ship a green rush was seen to float past, and one of these green fish, which never go far from the rocks. The people in the Pinta saw a cane and a staff in the water, and took up another staff very curiously carved, and a small board, and great plenty of weeds were seen which seemed to have been recently torn from the rocks. Those of the Niña, besides similar signs of land, saw a branch of a thorn full of red berries, which seemed to have been newly torn from the tree. From all these indications the Admiral was convinced that he now drew near to the land, and after the evening prayers he made a speech to the men, in which he reminded them of the mercy of God in having brought them so long a voyage with such favourable weather, and in comforting them with so many tokens of a successful issue to their enterprise, which were now every day becoming plainer and less equivocal. He besought them to be exceedingly watchful during the night, as they well knew that in the first article of the instructions which he had given to all the 3 ships before leaving the Canaries, They were enjoined, when they should have sailed 700 leagues west without discovering land, to lay to every night from midnight till daybreak, and, as he had very confident hopes of discovering land that night, he required every one to keep watch at their quarters, and besides the gratuity of 30 crowns a year for life, which had been graciously promised by their sovereigns to him that first saw the land, he engaged to give the fortunate discoverer a velvet doublet from himself. After this, as the Admiral was in his cabin about 10 o'clock at night, he saw a light on shore, but it was so unsteady that he could not certainly affirm that it came from land. He called to one Peter Gutierrez, and desired him to try if he could perceive the same light, who said he did, but one Roderick Sanchez of Segovia, on being desired to look the same way, could not see it, because he was not up time enough, as neither the Admiral nor Gutierrez could see it again above once or twice for a short space, which made them judge it to proceed from a candle or torch belonging to some fisherman or traveller, who lifted it up occasionally and lowered it again, or perhaps from people going from one house to another, because it appeared and vanished again so suddenly. Being now very much on their guard, they still held on to their course until about 2 in the morning of Friday the 12th of October, when the Pinta, which was always far ahead, owing to her superior sailing, made the signal of seeing land, which was first discovered by Roderick de Triana, at about 2 leagues from the ship, but the 30 crowns a year were afterwards granted to the Admiral, who had seen the light in the midst of darkness, a type of the spiritual light which he was the happy means of spreading in these dark regions of error. Being now so near land, all the ships lay to, everyone thinking it long till daylight, that they might enjoy the sight they had so long and anxiously desired. When daylight appeared, the newly discovered land was perceived to consist of a flat island 15 leagues in length, without any hills, all covered with trees, and having a great lake in the middle. The island was inhabited by great abundance of people, who ran down to the shore filled with wonder and admiration at the sight of the ships, which they conceived to be some unknown animals. The Christians were not less curious to know what kind of people they had fallen in with, and the curiosity on both sides was soon satisfied, as the ships soon came to anchor. The Admiral went on shore with his boat well armed, and having the royal standard of Castile and Leon displayed, accompanied by the commanders of the other 2 vessels, each on his own boat, carrying the particular colours which had been allotted for the enterprise, which were white with a green cross and the letter F on the side, and on the other the names of Ferdinand and Isabella crowned. The whole company kneeled on the shore and kissed the ground for joy, returning God thanks for the great mercy they had experienced during their long voyage through seas hitherto unpassed, and their now happy discovery of an unknown land. The Admiral then stood up and took formal possession in the usual words for their Catholic Majesties of the island, to which he gave the name of San Salvador. All the Christians present admitted Columbus to the authority and dignity of Admiral and Viceroy, pursuant to the commission which he had received to that effect, and all made oath to obey him as the legitimate representative of their Catholic Majesties, with such expressions of joy and acknowledgment as became their mighty success, and they all implored his forgiveness of the many affronts he had received from them through their fears and want of confidence. Numbers of the Indians, or natives of the island, were present at these ceremonies, and perceiving them to be peaceable, quiet, and simple people, the Admiral distributed several presents among them. To some he gave red caps, and to others strings of glass beads, which they hung about their necks, and various other things of small value, which they valued as if they had been jewels of high price. After the ceremonies the Admiral went off in his boat, and the Indians followed him even to the ships, some by swimming and others in their canoes, carrying parrots, clews of spun cotton yarn, javelins, and other such trifling articles, to barter for glass beads, bells, and other things of small value. Like people in the original simplicity of nature, they were all naked, and even a woman who was among them was entirely destitute of clothing. Most of them were young, seemingly not above 30 years of age, of a good stature, with very thick black lank hair, mostly cut short above their ears, though some had it down to their shoulders, tied up with a string about their head like women's tresses. Their countenances were mild and agreeable, and their features good, but their foreheads were too high, which gave them rather a wild appearance. They were of a middle stature, plump and well shaped, but of an olive complexion, like the inhabitants of the Canaries, or sunburnt peasants. Some were painted with black, others with white, and others again with red. In some the whole body was painted, in others only the face, and some only the nose and eyes. They had no weapons like those of Europe, neither had they any knowledge of such, for when our people showed them a naked sword they ignorantly grasped it by the edge. Neither had they any knowledge of iron, as their javelins were merely constructed of wood, having their points hardened in the fire, and armed with a piece of fishbone. Some of them had scars of wounds on different parts, and being asked by signs how these had been got, they answered by signs that people from other islands came to take them away, and that they had been wounded in their own defence. They seemed ingenious and of a voluble tongue, as they readily repeated such words as they once heard. There were no kind of animals among them excepting parrots, which they carried to barter with Christians among the articles already mentioned, and in this trade they continued on board the ships till night, when they all returned to the shore. In the morning of the next day, being the 13th of October, many of the natives returned on board the ships in their boats or canoes, which were all of one piece, hollowed like a tray from the trunk of a tree. Some of these were so large as to contain 40 or 45 men, while others were so small as only to hold one person, with many intermediate sizes between these extremes. These they worked along with paddles formed like a baker's peel, or the implement which is used in dressing hemp. These oars or paddles were not fixed by pins to the sides of the canoes like ours, but were dipped into the water and pulled backwards as if digging. Their canoes are so light and artfully constructed that if overset they soon turn them right again by swimming, and they empty out the water by throwing them from side to side like a weaver's shuttle, and when half emptied they lade out the rest with dried calabashes cut in two, which they carry for that purpose. The second day the natives, as said before, brought various articles to barter for such small things as they could procure in exchange. Jewels or materials of any kind were not seen among them, except some small plates of gold which hung from their nostrils, and on being questioned from whence they procured the gold, they answered by signs that they had it from the south, where there was a king who possessed abundance of pieces and vessels of gold, and they made our people to understand that there were many other islands and large countries to the south and southwest. They were very covetous to get possession of anything which belonged to the Christians, and being themselves very poor, with nothing of value to give in exchange, as soon as they got on board, if they could lay hold of anything which struck their fancy, though it were only a piece of a broken glazed earthen dish or porringer, they leaped with it into the sea and swam on shore with their prize. If they brought anything on board, they would barter it for anything whatever belonging to our people, even for a piece of a broken glass. Insomuch that some gave 16 large clews of well spun cotton yarn, weighing 25 pounds, for 3 small pieces of Portuguese brass coin not worth a farthing. Their liberality in dealing did not proceed from their putting any great value on the things themselves which they received from our people in return, but because they valued them as belonging to the Christians, whom they believed certainly to have come down from heaven, and they therefore earnestly desired to have something from them as a memorial. In this manner all this day was spent, and the islanders as before went all on shore at night. Section 117. This recording is in the public domain. Section 118 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Piotr. The World's Story, Volume 11, Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. edited by Eva March TAPPAN, section 118, Toussaint Louverture, 1801, by Wendell Phillips. Toussaint Louverture was a full-blooded Negro slave of Haiti who became a revolutionary leader and finally governed the island from 1795 to 1801. The remainder of his story is told in the following extract. The Editor. It was 1811. The Frenchmen who lingered on the island described its prosperity and order as almost incredible. You might trust a child with a bag of gold to go from Samana to Port-au-Prince without risk. Peace was in every household. The valleys laughed with fertility. Culture climbed the mountains. The commerce of the world was represented in its harbours. At this time Europe concluded the Peace of Amiens, and Napoleon took his seat on the throne of France. He glanced his eyes across the Atlantic, and with a single stroke of his pen reduced Cayenne and Martinique back into chains. He then said to his council, "What shall I do with Santo Domingo?" The slaveholders said, "Give it to us." Napoleon turned to the Abbé Grégoire. "What is your opinion?" "I think those men would change their opinion if they changed their skins." Colonel Vincent, who had been private secretary to Toussaint, wrote a letter to Napoleon in which he said, "Sire, leave it alone. It is the happiest spot in your dominions. God raised this man to govern, races melt under his hand. He has saved you this island, for I know of my own knowledge that, when the Republic could not have lifted a finger to prevent it, George III offered him any title and any revenue if he would hold the island under the British crown. He refused, and saved it for France." Napoleon turned away from his council, and is said to have remarked, "I have 60,000 idle troops, I must find them something to do." He meant to say, "I am about to seize the crown, I dare not to do it in the faces of 60,000 Republican soldiers, I must give them work at a distance to do." Mounting his horse and riding to the eastern end of the island, Samana, he, Toussaint, looked out on a sight such as no native had ever seen before. 60 ships of the line, crowded by the best soldiers of Europe, rounded the point. They were soldiers who had never yet met an equal, whose tread, like Cæsar's, had shaken Europe; soldiers who had scaled the pyramids and planted the French banners on the walls of Rome. He looked a moment, counted the flotilla, let the reins fall on the neck of his horse, and, turning to Christophe, exclaimed, "All France is come to Haiti. They can only come to make us slaves, and we are lost." He then recognized the only mistake of his life, his confidence in Bonaparte, which had led him to disband his army. Returning to the hills, he issued the only proclamation which bears his name and breathes vengeance. "My children, France comes to make us slaves. God gave us liberty. France has no right to take it away. Burn the cities, destroy the harvests, tear up the roads with cannon, poison the wells, show the white man the hell he comes to make." And he was obeyed. When the great William of Orange saw Louis XIV cover Holland with troops, he said, "Break down the dykes, give Holland back to the ocean," and Europe said "Sublime." When Alexander saw the armies of France descend upon Russia, he said, "Burn Moscow, starve back the invaders," and Europe said "Sublime." This black saw all Europe marshalled to crush him, and gave to his people the same heroic example of defiance. It is true the scene grows bloodier as we proceed, but remember, the white man fitly accompanied his infamous attempt to reduce freemen to slavery with every bloody and cruel device that bitter and shameless hate could invent. Aristocracy is always cruel. The black man met the attempt, as every such attempt should be met, with war to the hilt. In his first struggle to gain his freedom he had been generous and merciful, saved lives and pardoned enemies, as the people in every age and clime have always done when rising against aristocrats. Now, to save his liberty, the Negro exhausted every means, seized every weapon, and turned back the hateful invaders with a vengeance as terrible as their own, though even now he refused to be cruel. Leclerc sent word to Christophe that he was about to land at Cape City. Christophe said, "Toussaint is governor of the island, I will send to him for permission. If without it a French soldier sets foot on shore, I will burn the town and fight over its ashes." Leclerc landed. Christophe took 2,000 white men, women, and children, and carried them to the mountains in safety. Then, with his own hands, set fire to the splendid palace which French architects had just finished for him, and in 40 hours the place was in ashes. The battle was fought in its streets, and the French driven back to their boats. Wherever they went they were met with fire and sword. Once, resisting an attack, the blacks, Frenchmen born, shouted the Marseillaise hymn, and the French soldiers stood still, they could not fight the Marseillaise. And it was not till their officers sabred them on that they advanced, and then they were beaten. Beaten in the field, the French took to lies. They issued proclamations saying: "We do not come to make you slaves. This man Toussaint tells you lies. Join us and you shall have the rights you claim." They cheated every one of his officers except Christophe and Dessalines, and his own brother Pierre, and finally these also deserted him and he was left alone. And then sent word to Leclerc: "I will submit. I will continue the struggle for years. Could prevent a single Frenchman from safely quitting your camp. But I hate bloodshed. I have fought only for the liberty of my race. Guarantee that, I will submit and come in." He took the oath to be a faithful citizen, and on the same crucifix Leclerc swore that he should be faithfully protected, and that the island should be free. As the French general glanced along the line of his splendidly equipped troops, and saw opposite Toussaint's ragged, ill-armed followers, he said to him: "Louverture, have you continued the war? Where could you have gotten arms?" "I would have taken yours," was the Spartan reply. He went down to his house in peace. It was summer. Leclerc remembered that the fever months were coming when his army would be in hospitals, and when one motion of that royal hand would sweep his troops into the sea. He was too dangerous to be left at large. So they summoned him to attend a council, and here is the only charge made against him. The only charge. They say he was fool enough to go. Granted, what was the record? The white man lies shrewdly to cheat the Negro. Knight errantry was truth. The foulest insult you can offer a man since the Crusade is "you lie." Of Toussaint, Hermona, the Spanish general, who knew him well, said: "He was the purest soul God ever put into a body." Of him history bears witness: "He never broke his word." Maitland was travelling in the depths of the woods to meet Toussaint when he was met by a messenger, and told that he was betrayed. He went on and met Toussaint, who showed him 2 letters, one from the French general, offering him any rank if he would put Maitland in his power, and the other his reply. It was: "Sir, I have promised the Englishman that he shall go back. Let it stand, therefore, that the Negro, truthful as a knight of old, was cheated by his lying foe. Which race has reason to be proud of such a record? But he was not cheated, he was under espionage. Suppose he had refused? The Government would have doubted him, would have found some cause to arrest him. He probably reasoned thus: if I go willingly, I shall be treated accordingly," and he went. The moment he entered the room, the officers drew their swords and told him he was a prisoner, and one young lieutenant who was present says: "He was not at all surprised, but seemed very sad." They put him on shipboard and weighed anchor for France. As the island faded from his sight, he turned to the captain and said: "You think you have rooted up the tree of liberty, but I am only a branch. I have planted the tree so deep that all France could never root it up." Arrived in Paris, he was flung into jail, and Napoleon sent his secretary, Caffarelli, to him, supposing he had buried large treasures. He listened awhile, then replied: "Young man, it is true I have lost treasures, but they are not such as you come to seek." He was then sent to the castle of Saint-Just, to a dungeon 12 feet by 20, built wholly of stone, with a narrow window high up on the side, looking out on the snows of Switzerland. In winter ice covers the floor, in summer it is damp and wet. In this living tomb the child of the sunny tropics was left to die. From this dungeon he wrote 2 letters to Napoleon. One of them ran thus: "Sire, I am a French citizen, I never broke a law. By the grace of God I have saved for you the best island of your realm." Sire, of your mercy grant me justice." Napoleon never answered this letter. The commandant allowed him 5 francs a day for food and fuel. Napoleon heard of it, and reduced the sum to 3. The luxurious usurper, who complained that the English Government was stingy because it allowed him only $6,000 a month, stooped from his throne to cut down $1 to a half, and still Toussaint did not die quick enough. This donjon was a tomb. In this tomb Toussaint was buried, but he did not die fast enough. Finally the commandant was told to go into Switzerland, to carry the keys of the donjon with him, and to stay 4 days. When he returned, Toussaint was found starved to death. That imperial assassin was taken 12 years after to his prison at St. Helena, planned for a tomb as he had planned that of Toussaint, and there he whined away his dying hours in pitiful complaints of curtains and titles, of dishes and rides. God grant that when some future Plutarch shall weigh the great men of our epoch, the whites against the blacks, he do not put that whining child at St. Helena into one scale, and into the other the Negro meeting death like a Roman, without a murmur, in the solitude of his icy dungeon. From the moment he was betrayed, the Negroes began to doubt the French, and rushed to arms. Soon every Negro but Maurepas deserted the French. Leclerc summoned Maurepas to his side. He came loyally bringing with him 500 soldiers. Leclerc spiked his epaulets to his shoulders, shot him, and flung him into the sea. He took his 500 soldiers on shore, shot them on the edge of a pit, and tumbled them in. Dessalines from the mountain saw it, and selecting 500 French officers from his prisons, hung them on separate trees in sight of Leclerc's camp, and born as I was not far from Bunker Hill, I have found yet no reason to think he did wrong. They murdered Pierre Toussaint's wife at his own door, and after such treatment that it was mercy when they killed her. The maddened husband, who had but a year before saved the lives of 1,200 white men, carried his next 1,000 prisoners and sacrificed them on her grave. The French exhausted every form of torture. The Negroes were bound together and thrown into the sea. Anyone who floated was shot. Others sunk with cannon balls tied to their feet. Some smothered with sulphur fumes. Others strangled, scorched to death, gibbeted. 16 of Toussaint's officers were chained to rocks in deserted islands, others in marshes, and left to be devoured by poisonous reptiles and insects. Rochambeau sent to Cuba for bloodhounds. When they arrived, the young girls went down to the wharf, decked the hounds with ribbons and flowers, kissed their necks, and, seated in the amphitheatre, the women clapped their hands to see a Negro thrown to these dogs, previously starved to rage. But the Negroes besieged this very city so closely that these same girls in their misery ate the very hounds they had welcomed. The war went on. Napoleon sent over 30,000 more soldiers. But disaster still followed his efforts. What the sword did not devour, the fever ate up. Leclerc died. Pauline carried his body back to France. Napoleon met her at Bordeaux, saying, "Sister, I gave you an army, you bring me back ashes." Rochambeau, the Rochambeau of our history, left in command of 8,000 troops, sent word to Dessalines, "When I take you, I will not shoot you like a soldier, or hang you like a white man, I will whip you to death like a slave." Dessalines chased him from battlefield to battlefield, from fort to fort, and finally shut him up in Samana. Hitting cannon balls to destroy his fleet, Dessalines learned that Rochambeau had begged of the British Admiral to cover his troops with the English flag, and the generous Negro suffered the boaster to embark undisturbed. Some doubt the courage of the Negro. Go to Haiti and stand on those 50,000 graves of the best soldiers France ever had, and ask them what they think of the Negro's sword. And if that does not satisfy you, go to France, to the splendid mausoleum of the Counts of Rochambeau, and to the 8,000 graves of Frenchmen who skulked home under the English flag, and ask them. Haiti, from the ruins of her colonial dependence, is become a civilized state, the 7th nation in the catalogue of commerce with this country, inferior in morals, in education to none of the West Indian Isles. Foreign merchants trust her courts as willingly as they do our own. Thus far she had foiled the ambition of Spain, the greed of England, and the malicious statesmanship of Calhoun. Toussaint made her what she is. In this work there was grouped around him a score of men, mostly of pure negro blood, who ably seconded his efforts. They were able in war and skilful in civil affairs, but not, like him, remarkable for that rare mingling of high qualities which alone makes true greatness, and ensures a man leadership among those otherwise almost his equals. Toussaint was indisputably their chief. Courage, purpose, endurance, these are the tests. He did plant a state so deep that all the world has not been able to root it up. I would call him Napoleon, but Napoleon made his way to empire over broken oaths and through a sea of blood. This man never broke his word. No retaliation was his great motto and the rule of his life, and the last words uttered to his son in France were these: "My boy, you will one day go back to Santo Domingo. Forget that France murdered your father." I would call him Cromwell, but Cromwell was only a soldier, and the state he founded went down with him into his grave. I would call him Washington, but the great Virginian held slaves. This man risked his empire rather than permit the slave trade in the humblest village of his dominions. You think me a fanatic, for you read history not with your eyes but with your prejudices. But 50 years hence, when truth gets a hearing, the muse of history will put Phocion for the Greek and Brutus for the Roman, Hampden for England, Lafayette for France, choose Washington as the bright, consummate flower of our earlier civilization, and John Brown the ripe fruit of our noonday, then, dipping her pen in the sunlight, will write in the clear blue, above them all, the name of the soldier, the statesman, the martyr, Toussaint Louverture. End of section 118. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 119 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico and the West Indies. Read for LibriVox.org by Sonia. The Marble Memory of Josephine, Empress of France, by Lafcadio Hearn. You reach Fort-de-France, the capital of Martinique, by steamer from Saint-Pierre in about an hour and a half. There is an overland route, La Trace, but it is a 25-mile ride, and a weary one in such a climate, notwithstanding the indescribable beauty of the landscapes which the lofty road commands. Rebuilt in wood after the almost total destruction by an earthquake of its once picturesque streets of stone, Fort-de-France, formerly Fort-Royal, has little of outward interest by comparison with Saint-Pierre. It lies in a low, moist plain and has few remarkable buildings. You can walk all over the little town in about half an hour. But the Savane, the great green public square, with its grand tamarinds and sabliers, would be worth the visit alone, even were it not made romantic by the marble memory of Josephine. I went to look at the white dream of her there, a creation of master sculptors. It seemed to me absolutely lovely. Sea winds have bitten it, tropical rains have streaked it, some microscopic growth has darkened the exquisite hollow of the throat, and yet such is the human charm of the figure that you almost fancy you are gazing at a living presence. Perhaps the profile is less artistically real, statuesque to the point of betraying the chisel, but when you look straight up into the sweet Creole face, you can believe she lives. All the wonderful West Indian charm of the woman is there. She is standing just in the center of the Savane, robed in the fashion of the First Empire, with gracious arms and shoulders bare. One hand leans upon a medallion bearing the eagle profile of Napoleon. 7 tall palms stand in a circle around her, lifting their comely heads into the blue glory of the tropic day. Within the enchanted circle you feel that you tread holy ground, the sacred soil of artist and poet. Here the recollections of memoir writers vanish away. The gossip of history is hushed for you. You no longer care to know how rumor has it that she spoke or smiled or wept. Only the bewitchment of her lives under the thin, soft, swaying shadows of those feminine palms. Over violet space of summer sea, through the vast splendor of azure light, she is looking back to the place of her birth, back to beautiful drowsy Trois-Îlets, and always with the same half-dreaming, half-plaintive smile, unutterably touching. End of section 119, This recording is in the public domain.
Section 120 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America. The World's Story, Volume 11, Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 120, The Fer-de-Lance of Martinique, by Lafcadio Hearn. There are trees distilling venom. There are plants that have fangs. There are perfumes that affect the brain. There are cold green creepers whose touch blisters flesh like fire, while in all the recesses and the shadows is a swarming of unfamiliar life, beautiful or hideous, insect, reptile, bird, interwarring, devouring, preying. But the great peril of the forest, the danger which deters even the naturalist, is the presence of the terrible Fer-de-Lance, Trigonocephalus lanceolatus, Bothrops lanceolatus, Crasputis vallis, deadliest of the occidental Thanatophidia, and probably one of the deadliest serpents of the known world. There are no less than 8 varieties of it, the most common being the dark gray, speckled with black, precisely the color that enables the creature to hide itself among the protruding roots of the trees by simply coiling about them and concealing its triangular head. Sometimes the snake is a clear bright yellow. Then it is difficult to distinguish it from the bunch of bananas among which it conceals itself, or the creature may be a dark yellow, or a yellowish brown, or the color of wine leaves, speckled pink and black, or dead black with a yellow belly, or black with a pink belly, all hues of tropical forest mold, of old bark or decomposing trees. The iris of the eye is orange, with red flashes. It glows at night like burning charcoal. And the Fer-de-Lance reigns absolute king over the mountains and the ravines. He is lord of the forest and the solitudes by day, and by night he extends his dominion over the public roads, the familiar paths, the parks, the pleasure resorts. People must remain at home after dark, unless they dwell in the city itself. If you happen to be out visiting after sunset, only a mile from town, your friends will caution you anxiously not to follow the boulevard as you go back, and to keep as closely as possible to the very center of the path. Even in the brightest noon you cannot venture to enter the woods without an experienced escort. You cannot trust your eyes to detect danger. At any moment a seeming branch, a knot of lianas, a pink or gray root, a clump of pendant yellow fruit, may suddenly take life, writhe, stretch, spring, strike. Then you will need aid, indeed, and most quickly, for within the span of a few heartbeats the wounded flesh chills, tumefies, softens. Soon it changes color and begins to spot violaceously, while an icy coldness creeps through all the blood. If the pansier or the physician arrives in time and no vein has been pierced, there is hope. But it more often happens that the blow is received directly on a vein of the foot or ankle, in which case nothing can save the victim. Even when life is saved, the danger is not over. Necrosis of the tissues is likely to set in. The flesh corrupts, falls from the bone sometimes in tatters, and the colors of its putrefaction simulate the hues of vegetable decay. The ghastly grays and pinks and yellows of trunks rotting down into the dark soil which gave them birth. The human victim moulders as the trees moulder, crumbles and dissolves as crumbles the substance of the dead palms and bolotas. The death of the woods is upon him. Today a Fer-de-Lance is seldom found exceeding 6 feet in length, but the dimensions of the reptile, at least, would seem to have decreased considerably by man's warring upon it since the time of Père Labat, who mentions having seen a Fer-de-Lance 9 feet long and 5 inches in diameter. He also speaks of a Corresse, a beautiful and harmless serpent said to kill the Fer-de-Lance, over 10 feet long and thick as a man's leg. But a large Corresse is now seldom seen. The Negro woodsmen kill both creatures indiscriminately, and as the older reptiles are the least likely to escape observation, the chances for the survival of extraordinary individuals lessen with the yearly decrease of forest area. But it may be doubted whether the number of deadly snakes has been greatly lessened since the early colonial period. Each female produces viviparously from 40 to 60 young at birth. The favorite haunts of the Fer-de-Lance are to a large extent inaccessible or unexplored, and its multiplication is prodigious. It is really only the surplus of its swarming that overpours into the cane fields and makes the public roads dangerous after dark. Yet more than 300 snakes have been killed in 12 months on a single plantation. The introduction of the Indian mongoose, or mangouste, ichneumon, proved futile as a means of repressing the evil. The mangouste kills the Fer-de-Lance when it has a chance, but it also kills fowls and sucks their eggs, which condemns it irrevocably with the country Negroes, who live to a considerable extent by raising and selling chickens. Domestic animals are generally able to discern the presence of their deadly enemy long before a human eye can perceive it. If your horse rears and plunges in the darkness, trembles and sweats, do not try to ride on until you are assured the way is clear. Or your dog may come running back, whining, shivering. You will do well to accept his warning. The animals kept about country residences usually try to fight for their lives. The hen battles for her chickens. The bull endeavors to gore and stamp his supple enemy. The pig he gives more successful combat. But the creature who fears the monster least is the brave cat. Seeing a snake, she at once carries her kittens to a place of safety, then boldly advances to the encounter. She will walk to the very limit of the serpent's striking range, and begin to feint, teasing him, startling him, trying to draw his blow. How the emerald and the topazine eyes glow then! They are flames. A moment more and the triangular head, hissing from the coil, flashes swift as if moved by wings. But swifter still the stroke of the armed paw that dashes the horror aside, flinging it mangled in the dust. Nevertheless, pussy does not yet dare to spring. The enemy, still active, has almost instantly reformed his coil, but she is again in front of him, watching, vertical pupil against vertical pupil. Again the lashing stroke, again the beautiful encountering, again the living death is hurled aside. And now the scaled skin is deeply torn. One eye socket has ceased to flame. Once more the stroke of the serpent, once more the light, quick, cutting blow. But the trigonocephalus is blind, is stupefied, before he can attempt to coil. Pussy has leaped upon him, nailing the horrible flat head fast to the ground with her 2 sinewy paws. Now let him lash, writhe, twine, strive to strangle her. In vain! He will never lift his head. An instant more, and he lies still. The keen white teeth of the cat have severed the vertebrae just behind the triangular skull. End of section 120. This recording is in the public domain. Section 121. Of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America. The World's Story, Volume 11. Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 121. The Eruption of Mount Pelée, 1902. By Charles Augustus Stoddard. On the 8th of May, 1902, Mount Pelée, which had been inactive for 51 years, suddenly burst forth with scalding steam, liquid fire, stifling gas, and smothering dust. There had been warnings of disaster for several weeks, and a few of the inhabitants had made their way over the mountains or by boat to Fort-de-France, at the southern end of the island, but the great majority remained. The volcano was evidently uneasy, and threw up clouds of steam and a fine dust which covered everything and darkened the air, but no great damage had been done. The priests were praying in the cathedral and churches. The authorities ordered the people to stay, and many cheerful and hopeful people believed that there would be no serious eruption. 50 years had passed since any fatal outbreak had occurred. Probably after a little smoke, noise, and ashes all would be over. So the people hoped and waited till in the twinkling of an eye the whole vast mass of boiling, blazing, suffocating mud and ashes burst from the rent and torn crater, rising miles into the air, to fall the next instant and for hours thereafter, in killing blisters and deadly fumes, and choking lava dust on man and beast, orchards and gardens, houses and streets, the wharves and beaches, boats in the harbor, vessels in the roadstead, and even upon ships far out at sea. Meanwhile the earth was rocking, roofs were whirled away by a tempest, and as the affrighted crowds rushed down the steep streets to the Bay of St. Pierre, the sea rose, and with an immense tidal wave drowned them by thousands. In the gray dawn of that May morning there were 45,000 bright, handsome, living French Creoles, colored people, and Negroes in St. Pierre. Instead of sunrise came a rain of fire, amid which the whole population, shrieking, wailing, crazed, crammed the cathedral only to die, climbed the mountains and sought the forests only to be burned or buried alive, fled to the river to find it a torrent of scalding water, and to the sea to meet a watery grave. At noon there was but one living man in the ruined and desolate city of St. Pierre, and he was a Negro prisoner, burned but not dead, in a subterranean dungeon where he had been confined for crime. A strange travesty of justice! All the innocent met a dreadful doom. The one guilty and condemned criminal was saved. I have seen this naked Negro, his back scarred and blistered by the heat which found its way even into his prison. He is vouched for by the authorities of Fort-de-France, has come to New York, and if allowed to remain by the authorities, is to be shown as a curiosity in the United States. He was rescued 4 days after the eruption, frightened almost out of his senses, unable to say anything except that he heard dreadful noises, and felt intolerable heat, and thought he would die of thirst. The London Times gave a description of the scene as viewed from the deck of the Rotterdam, which arrived at moorings in St. Pierre half an hour before the eruption, on May 8, 1902. The Rotterdam approached the island very cautiously, the more so that as the land was neared, Mount Pelée was seen to be throwing out volumes of black smoke, but as on reaching the bay, several vessels were seen riding at anchor. Captain Freeman decided to bring his ship also to her moorings. This was about 7:30 on the morning of the 8th. The captain, the agent, and supercargo were engaged in conversation near the companion ladder, when suddenly, with a mighty earth-shaking roar, the whole side of the mountain seemed rent in twain from top to bottom, and a solid wall of fire swept over the town and bay. So rapid was its progress that those on board had hardly time to throw themselves wherever shelter was nearest when the vessel was struck with such force by the burning mass as nearly to capsize her, and she was enveloped from stem to stern in a whirlwind of fire. Alas for those who reached no shelter! They were never seen again. They either jumped overboard in the frantic effort to escape, or they were swept bodily away. No human being could stand against that terrific deluge of molten ashes. Even those who reached the cabin or hold did not escape, for almost every nook and cranny of the ship was filled with the blazing dust. Captain Freeman sought shelter in the chart room, but the portholes being open, the fire streamed in and burned him badly on face and hands. After the first shock was over, the captain came out on deck, as soon as it was possible, to do so with any chance of safety. The scene was now awful and terrifying. A pitchy darkness had succeeded, the cataract of fire, pierced only fitfully by the flames from the fated city. St. Pierre was blazing from every quarter, and as the flames rose higher, by their lurid light the doomed inhabitants could be seen, wildly running from place to place, vainly seeking a way to escape, and even above the roar of the flames could be heard their piercing shrieks of agony and despair. By heroic efforts the ship was saved and reached St. Lucia after 7 hours. Every part of the vessel was heaped with ashes like powdered pumice stone. There was not a square inch of her deck but was strewn with them. When one came to realize that when these ashes descended on the ship they were aglow, some idea could be formed of the awful nature of the danger through which the vessel had come. Moving slowly about were a few gray figures, clothes, hair, and beard covered with the same coating of ash. They looked like men suddenly stricken with age. One of these gray figures came up to the ship's agent as he went aboard. "You don't know me?" And indeed it was hard to recognize this seemingly old man, with face all scorched and blackened, hands held up helplessly, swollen to 3 times their natural size, and burned and blistered cruelly. Only his voice betrayed him. "Why, Captain, you have come through an awful time." "Aye, sir, from hell's gates. But look to the others. I'm all right." End of section 121. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 122 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia as the narrator.
Jim Locke as the Major.
And Monica is Gomez.
The World Story, Volume 11. Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Edited by Eva March TAPPAN. Section 122. The Court of Justice of General Gomez. 1895. By Grover Flint. Gomez was a native of Santo Domingo. At one time he served in the Spanish army, but he felt so indignant at Spanish methods that he left the army and became a planter. In the Revolution of 1895 he was put at the head of the Cuban forces, but when the Americans landed, he placed his followers at their disposal. The Editor. Rain fell intermittently day and night during the last week in May, and the forest trails became sloughs, wherein horses splashed to their knees, covering the backs of riders ahead with black mud. The rivers were swollen, and in the shallowest fords water rippled above the saddle girths, and your mount fought for a footing. Marches were therefore short, and made in the mornings. Of afternoons Gomez had offenders from all parts brought before him, and the journey was like riding the circuit with a British magistrate of the last century. Evil-doers were run to ground, and machates were punished. In Camagüey many officers had become demoralized. They were not hard-pressed enough to fight in self-defense, and they grew fond of ease in camp and cottage. Samples of discipline like the following were common. Scene. A bit of worn canvas stretched on poles between 2 palms. Beneath it, Gomez, in a hammock, with Colette, sitting in the grass, writing at his side. Rosa, Miguelito, and half a dozen alert ayudantes in background. Soldiers and assistentes in groups to right and left. Enter, in a cloudburst of geniality and clean linen, fat elderly man, with white moustache and red face. He gives his horse to an assistente. He wears a shiny pistol belt and cross belt with the stars of a major, top boots, and silver-mounted machete.
Ah, citizens, gentlemen, my respects to you all. My respects to the Commander-in-Chief. I report at my general's order. I trust my general is well.
Removes his hat and bows before headquarters. Gomez testily.
Lift up the tent. Let me see the man. I can't see the fellow.
Arranges his spectacles and peers from beneath canvas.
Ah, indeed, a commandante. How many men have you?
About 50, my general.
Gomez, raising his voice.
Answer my question directly. How many men have you?
The major, embarrassed.
Just 55, my general, and 40 rifles.
Are your men well, in good health? Have they ammunition?
Excellent, my general, with some 40 rounds per man.
How near does your family live?
The major, in mild astonishment.
2 leagues, my general.
Go to them today. Prepare your equipment. Turn over your men and your arms to Colonel Bosa at once. Tomorrow I will send you to Pinar del Rio, to Maceo, where there is fighting, where you will have to fight.
My general.
Monday you allowed the Spanish convoy to pass through your district without attacking them. You have men, you have arms and ammunition. You are strong. How is this?
But, my general, I did not know they were coming.
But you should know. It is your business to know. I knew. Everyone knew. The assistentes knew. It is easy enough to go one way and let the Spaniards go another.
Rising and addressing his officers.
Here, who wants an assistente? Here's a good, strong man for an assistente. But no, you must fight. You shall be a private soldier. Tear off those stars which you disgrace. You are a common soldier.
But, my general, remember my services in the last war. I fought in the 10 Years' War.
The more shame you. This is as if I said I had money, but I spent it. I had health, but I lost it. Do you think the war is already over? It is not when a man comes here saying, I am of ancient family, or I am a college professor, or I am a millionaire, that he is respected, but only when he can say, I fight. White or black or yellow, I fight is a man's glory here. We respect men for service alone, and your service does not entitle you to respect. Oh, I have heard of you many times before. It is my duty as Commander-in-Chief to make you fight as a common soldier. Here, Colonel Bosa, take this private soldier away.
And before the column was halfway through Camagüey, a major and 3 captains were privates of the escolta. End of section 122. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 123 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies, read for LibriVox.org by Monica MC. Execution Wall, Havana. Photograph, page 568. Adjoining Morro is Fort Cabañas, of the same general order of architecture. Wonderful architecture, rambling but symmetrical. Morro was built beginning in 1587, and Cabañas was built in 1763 to 1774. Where so many patriots were executed, the Cuban government has set a tablet in the wall, which is chipped by the bullets of the executioners, and surrounded it by an iron fence. It was the habit to stand prisoners facing the wall and then shoot them in the back. The picture shows a number of the dead on the ground, and one soldier standing in the act of turning and defying his executioners with the challenge, "You shall not shoot me in the back." Above this is the angel of peace, extending the laurel wreath. Thomas Rees. End of section 123. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 124 of Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. The World Story, Volume 11. Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the West Indies. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 124. How Freedom Came to Porto Rico, 1898, by William Dinwiddie. Spain formally released Porto Rico from her sovereignty at 12 o'clock on Tuesday, October 18, 1898, by the withdrawal of the troops from the capital city of San Juan. It was the breaking of the last tie which has bound the easternmost fertile isle of the Western Hemisphere to a galling yoke of tyranny and taxation for nearly 400 years. The dawn of this memorable day in Porto Rican history came clear, colorless, and hot. Not a cloud dotted the sky, and as the sun rose toward the zenith, the narrow, brick-paved street of San Juan quivered with moist heat, and in the breathless air the surging crowds elbowed one another for positions of vantage within the narrow shadows of noonday. 2 days before the ceremony, every hotel in the town was crowded to its utmost capacity, and on the night before the evacuation, strangers slept 3 and 4 together in the tiny dark rooms, whose only source of light was the stained-glass doors opening into a central rotunda, suffering all night long from an infestation of humming, insatiable mosquitoes. In the harbor lay a Spanish transport, ready to carry home the soldiers, while outside, on a calm ocean, lay our ships loaded with blue-uniformed men, waiting for the moment when the booming of the midday gun was to sound the death knell of Spanish supremacy and give Porto Rico to the American government. At daybreak on Tuesday, the last callings of the Spanish bugles rang through the town from the quartels of San Cristobal and Morro, and 1,600 Spanish soldiers prepared to march through the massive walled portals, down the narrow streets of the town, and out to the westward suburban town of Santurce, where they were to camp temporarily until the arrival of a second Spanish steamer. But through the courtesy of General John R. Brooke, commanding our forces, they were granted permission to remain in their barracks until all the Spanish transports arrived. A surrender of the conquered to the conqueror is a sad function from its very nature, but in this instance it was far more than sad. It was the acme of human misery, arising, however, not from the hurt done to martial spirit, but from the annihilation of happy homes. The Spanish soldiers and Guardia Civil have married largely among Porto Rican women, and have become factors in the domestic life of the island. The evacuation program did not provide for a condition like this, so the Spaniard went back to his own country, though only for a time perhaps, and his wife and children must weep and go hungry until his return. As if in answer to the shrill blasts of Spanish bugles, came the deeper notes of our own echoing back from without the city limits, and soon the steady, sturdy tramp of our own stalwart men resounded between the low walls of the city streets. We were going to cheer our country's flag and glory in our new possessions. Well, no one knows what the Spanish soldiers felt, a mixture perhaps of pleasure in going back to their hillside vineyards, of heartache at leaving their loved ones, and of well-marked hatred for those who had broken Spain's arrogant power. As the hour of 12 drew near, American soldiers stood before the white front of the balconied home of past Spanish governor-generals, and in the plaza before the Chamber of Deputies and the City Hall, and again at the gates of the castles of Morro and San Cristobal, patiently awaiting the coming of the hour. Around them at all these places were gathered queer, interesting, and withal motley crowds of American tourists and newspaper men, of well-dressed Spanish and Porto Rican merchants and landholders. Little talk was indulged in, and enthusiasm, if there was any, was withheld from active expression. The minutes were passed in hushed waiting, a straining of eyes toward the bare flagpoles, and a nervous consultation of watches. Now it was coming, and a long-drawn breath sighed through the packed crowds, followed by the first uneasy shuffling of feet. The cry of "Attention!" caused every soldier to straighten rigidly on his heels, except a few poor fellows who had dropped, weak and sweltering, under the fierce heat of the sun, and lay uncaring beneath the shaded walls. The newsmen craned their necks in eager expectancy, and the click of adjusted camera shutters could be heard from every point of elevation. At each flagstaff a shoulder-strapped man stood grasping the flag halyards, trying them now and again, in fear lest they might fail at the critical moment, and from their high-perched positions they watched the clock-towers or looked seaward toward the bold, rugged, fortified castles for the first flash of fire and smoke from the great black guns. Ding! And the little sweet-toned bell of a nearby cathedral sang the first stroke of 12. It was overpowered in its first vibrations by the deep bellowing clang of the great bell on the city hall. They answered each other in rhythmic chime, the ponderous and the weak, one after another, until the last echoing thrill of 12 made Porto Rico ours. The stars and stripes rose gently over every building, and were wafted by a new-born breeze, as if in sympathy with the rousing cheers of the surging Americans beneath, and as if in salutation to the roaring guns which belched their smoke far to seaward, as they boomed out the 21 shots of honor and of freedom. It was a deeply impressive ceremony, done without ostentatious display, done without gold-laced uniforms or martial panoply, but well done. The very simplicity of the celebration appeals to American hearts. Our attitude was not that of the dictator, but of the protector. No bombastic speeches wounded the still sensitive Spanish pride, no great military pomp caused the teeth of a vanquished enemy to grind in hidden rage. We raised our flag softly, proudly, if you like, but we raised it with an outstretched hand of friendship. With the floating of our flag over Spain's provincial capital of San Juan, the United States became not only the master of a veritable Garden of Eden, but the possessor of a vast amount of government property. In the cities of the whole island permanent structures have been erected, in the nature of buildings for officials, barracks for soldiers, many hospitals, and on the seacoast massive stone forts. In San Juan itself, our prizes include 2 wonderful stone forts, whose grey moss-covered walls tell a story of antiquated defences, which would, however, even now offer a very material protection against modern projectiles. On them were mounted 56 guns, new and old, 28 of which are fairly modern 6-inch breech-loading rifled guns, and 4 modern mortars. In the magazines were stored immense quantities of powder and ammunition. In fact, shortly before war was declared, an entire shipload of the most approved projectiles was landed at San Juan, and now belongs to our government. Again, in this city we now own a 5-storied infantry barracks, which has been constructed during the last 5 years, and will hold 100,000 men. It was damaged badly, but not beyond repair, during the 3 hours' naval bombardment of the city, when it was believed that Cervera's fleet lay in hiding in the harbor. There are 2 other immense barracks, but they are of old Spanish architecture, the Cuartel San Cristobal and the Marine Barracks. The United States also owns a new city hall and a great public building, the Intendencia, both facing the plaza of the city. The value of our entire acquisitions runs up into millions of money, which have been expended by Spain in furnishing homes for her soldiers and her officials, and in the vain attempt to protect and hold the colonial possessions, even though in years gone by she has valiantly and successfully repelled all assailants. The American officers who had the honor of raising the flags at San Juan were Major J.T. Dean at the Governor's Palace, Colonel Goethals of the Engineer Corps over the Intendencia, Major Carson of the Quartermaster's Department at the City Hall, and Major Day in command of the battery of the 5th Artillery over Morro Castle. Major Day also raised the first American flag floated at Ponce. Few troops took active part in the ceremony. 2 battalions of the 11th Infantry at different points, Troop A of the 6th Cavalry at the Palace, and the 5th Heavy Artillery at Morro and San Cristobal. All the afternoon, however, the soldiers were marching from camps without the city's limits, until at nightfall several thousand men were scattered through the town. On Monday night, at every street corner, stood the Spanish Guardia Civil, the official tyrant of the island, while sentries of the Spanish army were posted near all government buildings. When Tuesday's sunset came, our armed soldiers paced back and forth over the selfsame posts, while the Spanish soldiers, without guns though armed with bayonets, wandered through the town as aliens, or gathered in clusters in animated discussion. It was a curious metamorphosis. Almost at the moment that the brilliant planet Venus shone faintly in the waning light of evening, a great gun on Morro Castle, manned by men in blue, belched forth a farewell salute to day. The long white curls of smoke were wafted eastward slowly out to sea, and as its billows ascended high in the air, the sinking sun tinted their topmost crest with rosy light. An omen, it was said, that the black cloud of Spanish cruelty had passed away, and in its stead had dawned the pearl and rose-colored promise of future happiness for Porto Rico. End of section 124. This recording is in the public domain. End of The World Story, A History of the World in Story, Song and Art, Volume 11, Canada, South America, Central America, Mexico and the West Indies, edited by Eva March TAPPAN.